Hi, my name is Evgenii, and I work as a staff UI engineer. I know that interviews can be challenging, even for the most experienced engineers, so I've created this front-end intensive course to help you prepare for UI interviews. In this course, we'll learn how to effectively solve complex JavaScript challenges and build UI components using both the DOM API and React. Towards the end, we'll also tackle questions commonly asked in staff-level interviews, so everyone will find the course appropriately challenging. Go and ace your next front-end interview. So open the Debounce problem and debounce.vanilla.ts. So here's our placeholder for the debounce function. So first of all, because we're in TypeScript, let's learn how to actually properly type things. What we want to do, we want to making sure that debounce can only be called with a function. So what we're saying is that our debounce should accept the generic parameter f, which will extend any type of the function and will return void, because usually all the debounce callback returns void. Now, we need to provide the parameters. So the first parameter is our function, and then we use our generic parameter to type it. And then we pass the delay and use the number. So what we need to return now is another function. So we type it here like that. We pass the arguments, and now we need to return the function with the parameters that are exactly the same as f. So for that, we can use the TypeScript utility type called parameters, and then we pass our generic type f, and then it should return void. That will be our return type. Okay, so now let's return our function called debounced. And yeah, I think there is a syntax mistake that I don't see right now. Yeah, now it's solved. So now we return our debounced function. So now we provided the arguments with the parameters f. This will allow us TypeScript to match the function arguments that we are passing inside the debounce. And now, so what we want to check, so we first want to set up the timer ID that we will store in a closure. And we also want to properly type this. So for that, to type it, we're going to use the return type and then type of set timeout. This will give us exact return type of the set timeout function. And then by default, we'll assign it to null and also provide the nullest possible type here. OK, so if the timer ID is present, then we need to cancel the callback. So what we do here, we take our timer ID, and then we clear the timeout. OK, and our next step will be to set up the timeout. So we use the timer ID, and then we set the timeout. We pass our error function, and then we pass the delay that is specified as parameter. Now we need to execute our function that we are passing with the correct context. So we use the method called apply, which is available on function prototype. We pass the context object, which will be this, and we pass the arguments. So one thing to note here, see that the TypeScript is complaining that TypeScript doesn't know what this context is. So in order to solve this, we can tell the TypeScript, hey, TypeScript, we actually don't care. So we don't know the context, but we want to execute this context with this. So this just makes TypeScript happy because we provided the type explicitly. And let's see why this one is complaining. So if timer ID Okay, so now we're returning the function, and if we try to execute this example, you will see that it should only log C as a value. So let's try to run it. See, now it works. So it's canceled A and B as a calls. And if I try to run the test as well, so let's run the tests. So all tests passed. So this means that we solved the problem correctly. So now, how can we make the sections look a little bit more like Accordion? So now we need to do a little bit of styling. Let's use the class, and we already import the class, the object called CSS, which is just a CSS module within the file itself. So let's see how it's called actually. Imports. Yeah, it's called styles. Styles, and let's assign the class. So details. That should be on details. And then the summary, we can assign the class summary. Styles dot summary. Okay, so now let's get some styles done. So first of all, we probably want to remove this default marker. So for this, we can just use list style dot none. Then we also want to make sure that our content is kind of expandable in an animated way. So for this, we're going to define the transition. So here we use the transition dot max height. Then let's provide some animation function. And by default, when the content is not opened, the max height will be 0. So now the details tag have a special attribute called open. So we can style the content and see what when the content is open. So when content is open, we can set the max height to be 500 pixels. And then we can set the scroll, the overflow Y to be scroll, to show the scroll. Okay. So now if we go back and update the page, so it almost works. So I will teach you one more thing. So see, why it works when we expanding, but it doesn't work when we closing. So there is a thing called discrete properties in CSS. So discrete properties, it's something that have a 0 or 1 state. For instance, display. It can be none, or you can display. Or overflow. It can be either hidden or other value. So something that you cannot kind of describe as a number, so which cannot be easily transitioned. So for this case, the CSS team, they developed one thing called allow discrete property. So first of all, we want to animate content visibility. This is the internal CSS property that allows us to style the changes when things are being removed. And then we provide the animation function. And then we tell the CSS, hey browser, can you actually animate this property? I know that it's not by you cannot really animate this something that is cannot be represented as a number, but let's try this. And then the browser will try to automatically animate such property. So if we go back and then open this and close, see now when we close the section, what it does, it tries to animate the closing section because because we switch from the content visibility from display to none, and that's how the browser automatically handling this. And that's basically it. I don't think it makes sense to style this component. So CSS is relatively easy, but the main logic of Accordion is here. So see, we haven't written any specific JavaScript to handle the expansion of the element. So this is just the default HTML, which is provided to us. So on the interview, try to use the native elements as much as possible. The cool thing about native elements is that they by default are accessible. So if I try to open it with the keyboard, it already works. So I don't need to do much. Let's create also the function that will generate the toast element. So in this case, it's going to be get toast item. And then it will accept the item. And then we need to return the template of the toast element. So in the template will be super easy. It's going to be just a Lee element with a role status. And inside, we can place the content. So for instance, we can have the paragraph and then place the item to text. So what else? Once we also can assign the unique ID, which will be our item ID. OK. And now we discussed that each toast element can have a status, removed or not removed. This will be needed to then later understand if the element should be removed from the DOM. So this data attribute, we're going to access from the event object when the event is fired. So by default, this will be equal to false, but later we will handle this and set it to true. And OK, so now we can create a toast element. So let's create an element called toast element. And then we'll use the document create element. This can be just a simple div. And then we update the HTML of the toast item. And then just pass this get toast item. So the element that we created here is basically just a wrapper element. To get the real toast element, we need to access our wrapper. So let's create a constant called element, and then access wrapper, and first element child. This will give us the toast element that we just created here, the Lee item. OK. So now we have the element. This element now should be appeared on the DOM. So once we toast it, it should immediately appear on the DOM. So we access our list element, and then we use the append child to append the element. OK. So and once the element is appended, we need to immediately play the animation. So this means we access the class list. And then we need to use the fade in animation. So first of all, let's apply the class to the toast item itself. So here, we use a css.toast. And now we apply the css.fadeIn class name. So now, if we try to render this, so let's open our website. Refresh the page. So let's see Why it's complaining? Oh, it's because we haven't defined on animation end. Yes, that's correct. Let's provide on animation end event handler, and then now it should run. Okay. So here's our example. When I click on the toast, it should appear on the screen. And as you can see now, the toast appears on the screen, but it will not disappear because we don't do any cleanups right now. So let's fix this one. Here, when we toast an element, we now need to schedule the removal callback. So for this, we're going to set the timeout. And then our timeout will be the timer timeout constant, which is 3000 milliseconds. Sorry, what's the name of this? Oh, we don't have one. So let's create one. So it will be timeout 3 seconds. And then we pass it here. And once the timeout is passed, we need to take this to take the element which we added, and then remove the old fade-in class name. So we access the class list, remove fade-in class. Then we're going to add the fade-out class so we can gracefully disappear the element. Remove, fade out. And in order to so once we catch the animation end event here, we need to detect if the element can be removed. So for this, we set our data property. So we access the data set, dot removed, and then we set just true. Okay.
It's line 65 should not be removed.
It should be removed. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. Now the element should be marked as removed once the timeout plays. Let's test this out. So it will still not so technically the element itself will disappear because we play the timeout animation, but it will not be cleaned up from the DOM. So in order to clean up the DOM, we're going to listen for the animation end event. So this event takes has the target. So basically, the target will be the element on which the animation event was played. So and we check if target instance of HTML element, and also if the target dataset removed equals to true, then what we do, we just basically remove the element from the DOM. That's it. All right, so let's see if it works. So refresh the page. Let's output the elements, but first, let's access our list. So see, now the elements are automatically removed. So we've completed the toast. Congratulations.